my screen share here and we'll get started. Jamie, let me know if that doesn't show up as full screen, but I think we should be ready to roll.
Yes.
Well, yeah, thanks
screen.
everyone. Okay, great. I'm excited to share some tips and suggestions and ideas on where to go snowshoeing in Central Oregon. Hopefully this presentation will be helpful and useful to you, whether you've never been snowshoeing before or you've been, but maybe you're looking for some more ideas on places to go or some tips on how best to do it. So hopefully it's everything to everybody. But we'll have some pretty pictures. I'll start off with a little bit of background on Oregon Wild and what we're all about. Get into discussion about snowshoe gear. It's usually a topic there's a lot of questions about, and then some tips and some safety, and then we'll round it out with where to go. So let's just. And so Oregon Wild, what do we work on? State organization. We work on, one of the things we work on is protecting wildlife habitat. And yes, you are seeing an Ewok there in the middle of the frame. Technically, it is accurate. If you track Star Wars, the Ewoks they lived in redwood forests, and Oregon, most people don't realize this, but Oregon does have some redwood forests down on the southwest Oregon coast. And we've long been working to protect those forests. Oh, yes, Ewok habitat, working on protecting that, as well as wolves and other birds in the Klamath Basin, lots of other wildlife. So some of the places we've worked to protect over the years, the almost 50 years that Oregon Wild's been around, places like Opal Creek Wilderness, the Mount Jefferson Wilderness, places up around Mount Hood, Mount Thielsen, also known as the Lightning Rod of the Cascades. This is just north of Crater Lake National Park. Wilderness, one that most people haven't been to. This is kind of out a little east of Bend. Easy place to get away from the crowds. Just takes a little bit to get there. Here closer to those who live in Central Oregon is the Three Sisters Wilderness, one of many folks' favorites, I think. So Jamie, if you can do that quick snap poll here. This is the only question we'll ask folks tonight, but quick question for everyone. What percentage of Oregon is permanently protected as wilderness? So Jamie, are you able to get that question up?
I clicked it, but it seems like maybe you're not seeing it.
I'm not.
Oh, here we go. Relaunch poll.
There we go. All right. So that's a quiz question. So I will give you a hint. If you compare Oregon to our neighboring states, the state of Washington has protected about 10% of their state as wilderness. If you compare us to California, California has protected about 15% of their state as wilderness. So that gives you a little bit of a reference point. Jamie, how are we doing on the results here? What did people think?
We'll go ahead. We still have people voting, but I'll give it another maybe 5 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. Can you see the results?
I can, yes, interesting. So we have some folks who are pessimistically accurate and then a good split here, actually. This is interesting. Usually everybody goes low or everybody goes high. A lot of times when I've asked this question, the most common answer is to go high, is to guess around 30%. A lot of people seem to think we've protected about a third of the state. We live on a third of the state, and we kind of messed up a third of the state. And unfortunately, we have this great reputation for being a very green state, but that is a reputation we don't always do a very good job of living up to. So the correct answer is 4%. And you can close that poll out. Thank you, Jamie. We unfortunately, and the competitive part of me really doesn't like this. The state of Idaho has doubled us and protected about 9% of their state as wilderness. Idaho is a pretty conservative state compared to Oregon. So we have some work to do to catch up to our neighbors. But more importantly, we have some work to do to better protect the natural treasures that make Oregon such a special place. Our old growth forest, our clean drinking water. So along those lines, what is Oregon Wild working to protect? What landscapes around the state? The biggest news probably on this front is the River Democracy Act. This is something that Jamie and I are both working on every day, day in, day out. This is legislation that Senator Wyden introduced along with Senator Merkley last year. And this would designate a number of wild and scenic rivers all throughout the state, including here in Central Oregon, places like Tumalo Falls, Paulina Creek, Fall River, but also places in the Coast Range where we don't have a lot of protected rivers, as well as the high desert, South Fork Crooked River, Northeast Oregon, up in the Wallowas. So this is a one of the more significant pieces of legislation that Oregon has seen, period, throughout history. So we're very excited on this. We're working with a whole coalition of folks around the state. Breweries have come out in support. Businesses have come out in support. So very excited to see this legislation moving forward, hopefully this Congress. Other places here close to home that we're working on protecting is the Deschutes National Forest. We have our proactive campaigns like the River Democracy Act, where we're trying to get out there and get special designations to protect our public lands. Other times we're doing a little bit more defense, where we're trying to prevent either pipelines or clear cuts or logging of old growth. Anyone who lives in Central Oregon has probably seen a lot of logging as you go up and down Cascade Lakes Highway towards Mount Bachelor, or up Skyliners, or south of town, or pretty much pick a direction. There's a lot of logging, and there's more logging to come. So the role we play is we're trying to make sure that that is light touch logging. You can see these trees in the photo here. They have orange paint marks on them. That means those trees will not be logged. So trying to make sure that those large fire resistant trees that provide habitat and the most carbon storage are permanently protected. And then some fuels reduction and thinning can happen elsewhere. So trying to find the right balance there. That keeps us pretty busy here on the Deschutes National Forest, as well as the rest of the state. So enough about Oregon Wild. Let's get into the snowshoeing. And so we're going to start out here with the gear discussion. So I'm going to start out talking about snowshoes, and I'm going to pop out of screen share mode. And yeah, so with snowshoes, there are a variety of different types of snowshoes that you can find if you go out shopping for snowshoes. If you've never been before, my first recommendation is to try out renting a pair of snowshoes first. Try it out and give it maybe 2 days. You know, maybe the conditions were really bad the first day and it was more about the conditions than whether or not snowshoeing is a good fit for you and you had fun. So try it a few times before you spend a bunch of money on it. Lots of places in town, our outdoor shops will rent you snowshoes. And then, you know, if you are in the market to buy snowshoes, you know, unfortunately, the news is kind of like with other things when you're spending money. The more expensive it is, the better the product will be. However, a heavy caveat there that most of the time, the snowshoes that any of us will use when we're out on a 4, 5, 6 mile recreational casual snowshoeing trip, it doesn't really matter which snowshoe you use. You know, if you're 7 feet tall, you want to make sure you have the right snowshoe. If you're shorter, that can be helpful. But for most people, you don't really need to worry too much. If you're going out and doing a 10-mile backpacking trip with 50 pounds on your back, then definitely hold on. Make sure you get the right snowshoe for that kind of outing. But again, for the day trips, don't sweat. Do I have the right pair or not the right pair? There are a variety of different designs. There's generally two, you know, used to be those old wicker basket snowshoe designs were the standard for many, many, many years. Now there's kind of two main designs, and one of those you can see here is this guy has this metal bar that goes around, and then there's this webbing in the middle. That's a pretty standard design, probably the most common. The other type of snowshoe that you'll see pretty commonly is kind of an mostly plastic design. and just a more rigid snowshoe, and that tends to have more teeth. The teeth on this one you can see here are right here, primarily right under the foot. On the plastic ones, they tend to run sometimes all the way up and down the bottom of the snowshoe. So if you're on ice or icy conditions, those with more teeth, the plastic kind, can be a little bit better. There you can get, if you're again going on those really long excursions, sometimes you'll see snowshoes that have extensions that you can get on the back, and that if you're in deep powder, that can be helpful. But again, most of the time you don't really need that. Some snowshoes, if you look under the heel, there'll be a little bit of a bar that you can flip up, and that's to use when you're going, if you're on a steep uphill, so that your foot is a little bit more level, because it's going to your heel is going to be up rather than having it at a extended angle for every step of the way up. Again, for short little bits or short hills, not a big deal. But if you're going a long distance uphill, can be pretty helpful. The differences in snowshoes, they all tend to have a slightly different buckling system. The more expensive will tend to have a little bit of an easier buckle system. One thing to remember when you're putting your snowshoes on, and I've led a lot of snowshoe trips and taken people out, and I've seen people put them on sideways, backwards. It's hard to imagine doing it sideways, but you use the straps just right and you can figure it out. But if you're nervous about that, maybe just try it out at home. But it's pretty simple to figure it out. It's pretty straightforward buckle system on most snowshoes, almost all snowshoes. And maybe that's a good opportunity to kind of take a step back here and big picture on snowshoeing. I sometimes worry with this presentation that I get into the gear and this and that and all these different things. And snowshoeing is pretty basic and straightforward activity that anyone can go do outside. You don't have to be in tip-top, super athletic shape. Most people, when you start snowshoeing, you'll walk funny for the first time you're doing it for maybe 15 minutes because you feel like you should, because you get these things on your feet. And then after 15 minutes, you start walking a little more normally. And then you pretty much, before you know it, you're not even thinking about it. You're just walking along. And so it's pretty accessible type of outdoor activity. And then, with the safety part, I worry that I go through all these different safety precautions and things to think about and scare people off. So don't be scared off. Don't be overwhelmed with the gear discussion. Just trying to cover all the bases. One tip when you are putting your snowshoe on, this is true on most snowshoes, the one thing you want to make sure you do is don't put your boot too far forward. All snowshoes will have some type of webbing here or piece to the snowshoe. And if you put your snowshoe all the way forward, if you put your boot or your shoes all the way forward and you start rubbing up against that, the snowshoe is not going to work the way that it should. You'll notice there's this mechanism here where when you're strapped in, the heel of the snowshoe, every time you lift your foot up off the ground, the heel of the snowshoe is going to drop down, and your heel and foot will be up here. You want that. You don't want to have to carry the weight of your entire snowshoe on every step. So it's an important function. So rule number one, don't put your foot too far forward. On these snowshoes, you can see there's actually a guard right here, this piece. So you can't, it's sort of dummy proof. You can't put your foot any farther forward than that will allow you to. But most snowshoes don't have that. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. Don't put your foot too far forward. And I see there are a couple of questions coming in via the chat. So hopefully Jamie's capturing those. But we'll get to those. It's hard for me to see and try to answer them as we go. So we'll get to those during the Q&A at the end. So that's on snowshoes. That's kind of the short version. So I'm going to jump out here and get back into the presentation. So give me 1 second while I go back into share screen mode. Jamie, if you can let me know if this works right, that would be great. All right.
Almost there.
Full screen?
Yep, looks great.
Excellent. All right, smooth transitions, gotta love it. The next question I get from a lot of folks when you're out snowshoeing is, do I need poles? And with poles, it really is very similar to hiking. If you like hiking with poles, you're going to like snowshoeing with poles. You don't have to have poles. It is optional. If you're doing the more technical snowshoe, you probably want to have poles. If it's going to be icy conditions, poles can be helpful. For long distances, carrying weight on your back or steep inclines, declines, kind of like with hiking, poles can be helpful. But it's certainly not necessary. Again, for a lot of the casual recreational day trips we do with snowshoes, you don't usually need them, but it's kind of a personal preference on that front. When it comes to layering, or clothes, and what do you need to wear? It's kind of funny that the standard thing that I think with human nature that we all do is we get up early, we pile into the car, we drive up to the mountains, and the blood's not really pumping yet. You get out of the car and it's freezing cold, and you're like, I'm putting every layer I've got on, I'm getting my emergency blanket out, everything I've got. And you put your snowshoes on, you start hiking, you start going up the trail. 5 minutes later, you're sweating bullets, and it's just, you start stripping it all off. So remember that when you first get out of the car, that's the most likely going to be the coldest part. You're going to start and warming up. So keep that in mind. Obviously, be careful. Conditions can change. Don't leave your layers behind in the car, but maybe reassess what you think you're going to need, and always err on the side of caution and bringing too much, but maybe bring that extra layer in your backpack. And again, with layers rather than just, one really thick coat that's kind of an all or nothing. Go with layers. That way you can take some off. If your backpack runs out of space, tie it around your waist. So one other thing to think about there with what you're wearing. Gaiters, again, this is something folks may not be familiar with, but it's basically a piece of fabric that you can attach to your kind of ankle area. And basically what it does is it just kind of covers the gap between your snow pants and the top of your boots, where snow can get into your boots. Snow in your boots melts, cold feet, not great. Most of the time on a pretty packed down trail, you're not going to be kicking up a lot of snow that's then going to be falling into your shoes. So not a huge concern. If you're blazing trail on a fresh powder day, you're definitely going to want that, because there's a lot of snow around. And I always encourage people to get off the trail into the fresh powder, even if just for a little bit, because it's really fun. So it's kind of helpful to have gaiters, but not needed. So gaiters aren't too expensive, and can be handy on certain occasions. So next thing for gear is footwear. And I've seen people out there snowshoeing with just tennis shoes on, and sometimes that works. I definitely don't recommend that, but you can get away with that on certain days with the weather's really nice. But most common, what you'll see is people will just wear their hiking boots, and that's great, perfect, works every single time. If you have snow boots, those work even better. They'll keep you a little bit warmer potentially. If your snow, some snow boots get pretty big and bulky. So if yours are the big and bulky kind, try them out and make sure they fit into your snowshoe at home before you head out. Most snowshoes will fit. They've got those buckle systems which will allow you to really adjust it to fit almost anything. But if you're concerned and they're really bulky, maybe test them out at home. Definitely not sandals, goes without saying. And then, Crocs as well. Don't want to do that. Too cold. So hiking boots, that's going to get you. And if your hiking boots or your snow boots aren't 100% waterproof, it's probably fine, unless it's really melty, heavy, wet snow or it's raining. It's probably fine. It's typically when you're out snowshoeing, it's going to be pretty cold. And so there's not going to be a whole lot of melting snow that will try to get into your shoes. So it's certainly helpful, and it's best to have waterproof, but I wouldn't stress out about that on your normal day out 4, 5, 6 miles snowshoe trip. Water, food, kind of the same thing with hiking. Always bring a little extra just in case for being safe. Maps and apps to use for finding your way and not getting lost. And this is a good one. We're really lucky, and a big shout out to the Nordic clubs we have here, Central Oregon Nordic Club and Meisner Nordic Club, and others in the region. And also all the volunteers, and the Forest Service also does their part in this to help maintain the trails, and also to create really handy, useful maps. We have great map options here in Central Oregon. There, you can get hard copy maps, you can find PDFs online for pretty much any snow park area that we have. Download that. You can have a hard copy printout if you want. What I tend to use these days most of the time is an app called, it's called PDF Maps, and it's made by a company called Avenza. So Googling or searching for apps of Avenza PDF Maps, any combination of that should get you to the right app. It's free, and we'll send a link out to where you get that, and then the name of that app in the email we send out tomorrow, so you don't have to try and write it down and find it right now. But it's a really simple, basic app. It's ready for grandma to use. Basically, just shows that PDF map that you download of say all the trails at any given snow park, and so you can see that map on your phone, and then it puts a blue dot wherever you are on that. So are you at the beginning of the trail? It'll show your little blue dot there. If you're halfway, it'll show you that. Super handy, because a lot of times it's nice to have a map, but if you don't know where you are on the map, it can be a little difficult to orient. So highly recommend that. And I'll also, in that email, will include a list of links to some of exactly where you can download those free PDF maps and then load them into the software. Pretty handy. Other people use like Gaia software. So if you have another any kind of topo mapping app on your phone, those can work really well also. The nice thing about those and the Avenza map is that even if you don't have cell reception, your phone will still work. It'll use the GPS function in your phone, and so it'll still be able to tell you exactly where you are on the map. Pretty neat function there. COVID, I'm not an epidemiologist, but outdoor activities definitely on the safer list of things to do these days. So that said, if there's a whole bunch of people right at the snow park, be thoughtful about that. But you've heard plenty about that. You don't need to hear that from me. The other 10 essentials for safety, for things to bring with you, very similar to hiking. It's the winter, it's snow season, so just be extra precautious and make sure you're packing all that stuff: extra food, water, first aid kit, all that good stuff. All right, so that kind of winds down the gear part, and now we'll get into some suggestions and tips to make sure you're having as much fun as possible when snowshoeing. So we as snowshoers sometimes have poles with us, but those cross-country skiers always have poles, and you can see the tracks here in this photo. For anyone who's cross-country skied before, you can see these very distinct tracks that get laid down, either groomed or just by cross-country skiers going through there. And if you've cross-country skied, it's a lot easier to ski on those tracks. And if snowshoers or anyone else comes along and stomps on it intentionally, unintentionally, it kind of wrecks that really smooth, efficient skiing motion. And so whenever you're out snowshoeing, this is really important. Make sure to try to, in a perfect world, you've got these ski tracks over here. Don't walk on those. Walk anywhere over here on the other part of the trail. Sometimes, if it gets narrow, the trail narrows down and there's only one safe way through and you got to walk on the ski tracks, safety wins out, walk on the ski tracks. But when possible, best to not walk on those ski tracks. As I was mentioning, those cross-country skiers always have poles, and they will use those poles against you as a weapon if they see you stomping all over with your snowshoes, because it's a really touchy issue. I mentioned this to a few folks, but when I've done this presentation in person, sometimes I'll have a Nordic cross-country skier who will attend, and they basically will attend to make sure that I make this point that you can't go on those cross-country ski tracks. And I always make the point, and they will still bring it up 3 or 4 times afterward as if it's not clear. So duly noted with all emphasis there. But yeah, it's pretty easy to share the trail. There's plenty of space for all of us to get along out there and have our fun. All right, another good tip on your snowshoes is to don't walk backwards. As I mentioned before, your snowshoe has that loose heel where the heel drops down. So if that heel drops down, actually, let's do it this way. The heel drops down and then you step backwards, that back of your snowshoe is going to dig right into the snow and then you're going to fall over backwards. You probably have a soft landing, all good, but more fun if you tend to not fall down. So just keep that in mind. Another one to remember is, if you're looking to get out on the trail and be the first one out there, just know that if it snowed a whole bunch the night before, you might be the one breaking trail. And if there's a foot of snow, you're going to be tired in about 5 minutes if you're the first one out. So if you're in a group of 3 or 4 people, no problem. You can just kind of trade off who's in the front. It's a lot more work going through that deep snow. The snowshoes certainly keep you way up, and so you aren't sinking in, but you're not levitating. You are still sinking in and working a little harder. After the first few people have gone through the fresh snow, it's pretty much a carved trail. So just remember, if you're going up first thing after a snow, you might be working a little harder. If you'd rather sleep in, let somebody else break trail, go a little later in the morning. This next one here is, what trails are difficult and what trails are easy, beginner versus expert snowshoe trails. You really can't say, unless a trail just has, tons of elevation gain or is long distance, then obviously it's going to be more difficult, but that's more an aerobic difficulty than it is a technical difficulty. Typically, the conditions of the day, the snow conditions that day, are really going to change how difficult any given trail is. I may go out and snowshoe a trail today, and it'll be awesome, easy. Oh yeah, I walked right along, great snow conditions. I'd call it a beginner trail. Jamie might go out tomorrow and say, oh my gosh, that was the most technical, difficult snowshoeing I've ever done. I was falling all over the place. And it just depends on the snow conditions. And the snow conditions in the winter can change really fast. So if you have nice packed snow, which is what we most often have, that's great. But if you get icy conditions, which can certainly happen, then that can really make any given trail a whole lot more difficult. So that's something to keep an eye out, just try to check the conditions report. Ski areas will oftentimes have relevant snow reports, so you can kind of read those. There are a lot of different Facebook pages for Nordic clubs that you can join those, or they'll have websites where you'll see conditions that are really updated, sometimes by the hour. So you can get pretty good intel on those. I'd also recommend you can check webcams. If you're looking to see, is it a sunny day? Is it a cloudy day? Check the webcams. Mount Bachelor here in Central Oregon has a bunch of webcams that'll tell you if it's sunny or not. They'll also be pretty helpful on road conditions if you're going to other parts of the state to go play in the snow. Trip Check, if you Google Trip Check, there's a great website that shows all the different highway webcams around the state, so you can check that out and kind of get a little bit sense of the weather conditions and in the sun versus cloudy conditions. And speaking of weather, this is really something, and I'll get into this a little bit more when we're looking at whether or not you want to go to this spot versus that spot, which trail is good for today. Weather can really should be your dominating influencer there as far as which trail do you want to do today. If it's a sunny day, get out there and do one of the snowshoe trails that has good views, where you're going to see the Three Sisters or Broken Top. Take advantage of that clear sky and get that view. If it's a stormy day, don't do that trail and think you're going to get great views. You're probably just going to see whiteout clouds. And sometimes those trails that have the best views are a little bit more open and exposed, not as many trees along the trail. And so on a stormy day, that means you're going to get little more snow blowing around in your face, and it's just a little less fun. So general rule of thumb that I have, and I try to be pretty strict about this, is if it's a sunny day, I'm going to go somewhere that has a good view. If it's a stormy day, I'm going to go somewhere that's in the forest and a little more sheltered. So that's a good rule of thumb to keep in mind. As far as fitness goes and how far you think you might want to snowshoe and what you're planning and trying to map out your route, if you haven't done a lot of snowshoeing, I tend to suggest starting out with assuming if you're normally in shape to hike, say 8 miles, say, okay, my first snowshoe out, I'm going to plan on 4 miles. And maybe you can do more, that's great. But it does take a little bit more energy and just goes a little slower. So factor that in, maybe a 2-to-1 ratio there on how far you're going to go. As far as snow parks and passes go, the good news is it's very simplified. All snow parks, almost all of them require you to have a snow park pass, which you can get at any outdoor store. You can get it at REI. You can get it at the DMV. The hot tip is get it somewhere that doesn't charge a fee on top of it. 50-50. Some places do, some places don't. You can call ahead of time. I know DMV definitely doesn't, and a few other places don't as well. So check on that ahead of time. There's all kinds of other trailhead parking passes I'm sure everybody knows about. You don't have to worry about those if you're going to a snow park in the winter. So that's kind of nice, simplifies that a little bit. And then dogs. I've got a map coming up here, but are dogs allowed on snowshoeing trails? There's a whole world of dog etiquette that I won't get into, but that still applies when you're out snowshoeing on the trails. So there is an interesting thing here we have here as a rule of thumb in Central Oregon. If you head out the Cascade Lakes Highway, which is where a lot of our snowshoeing options are, if you are on the north side of Cascade Lakes Highway, dogs are not allowed. If you're on the south side of Cascade Lakes Highway, dogs are allowed. So very simple breakdown for where they're allowed. You can always Google it if you don't remember, was it the north or south? Dogs on the south side, not the north side. All right. So again, thanks to a lot of great volunteer support and agency support from the Forest Service and others, we have very, very, very well-marked trails here in Central Oregon. Much better than, say, the Mount Hood area or some other parts of the state. You'll see a lot of places where the trails have these great blue diamond markers attached to trees, every 100 feet on the trail, really well marked. But don't assume that every single trail is going to be that well marked. You might be on a tree that fell over. So always pay attention. And remember, it can be pretty tricky. Well, actually, I'll get to that in a minute. So lunchtime, a lot of times folks will be out, they'll be having their lunch, and they'll stop for lunch. They'll be like, this is great. They'll chit chat with their friends and family for a little while, and then eventually they'll get to their lunch. And the one tip I would give you is that it can get cold once you stop moving around, stop going uphill, and you sit down in the snow. It can get cold pretty fast. So plan on a short lunch, and if it's still comfortable out, great. Have all the fun you want, hanging out for as long as you want, but maybe eat your lunch once you get to your lunch spot, and don't postpone it, because you might get cold and then it's an uncomfortable. One thing you can do that'll buy you a little bit of time, there are lots of these little pads that you can get at any outdoor store, really thin. Things weigh about as much as a paperclip. It's just air and foam in there, and you can stuff it all up right in your backpack, hang it from your backpack. You won't even know it's there. And you can just sit on that, and that really helps. When you're sitting with your butt right on the snow, it really can suck the body heat out pretty quickly, and this will buy you some lunchtime, and that's a good thing. If you're like me, you forget to bring it every single time, almost without fail. And so what I tend to do as my backup when I've forgotten that and get to lunch is I'll take my gloves off and I'll just sit on my gloves. Some people, if they're warmed up or have an extra layer or jacket, they'll sit on that. That works great too. But if you can remember, use one of those pads. That's great. All right. And then the other thing you'll notice here, this is how I would sit when I'm having lunch. You'll notice that the snowshoes are still on. You could take them off if you want, but it is, it is a little bit of a hassle to take them on and off. So what I'll do is I'll just um, sit back, you kick the heels out, and then you're pretty comfortable. So you kind of get the benefit of that loose heel. Getting into this position can be a little more tricky than you realize unless you're out there. So what I always do is you can kind of get down on your hands and knees, go kind of go down forward, and then roll over onto your butt, and that way you can do this versus having to. You can also just sort of free fall back into the snow. That can be fun. And then getting up from this position, obviously, if those snowshoes are attached and in that position, going straight up is as you won't be able to. So kind of do the reverse. So from this position, just roll over onto your knees, and then it's really easy to get up. All right. So this is one question that I have been stumped by forever, and I have researched it and looked into it. But the question that comes up is, what do you do when you get these snowballs that form on the bottom of your snowshoes? I hate it when that happens. Everybody hates it when that happens. You end up carrying these balls of snow that weigh like 10 pounds, make it harder to walk. And it typically only happens on warm days where the snow starts to soften, gets a little stickier, and then starts to glom onto the bottom of your snowshoes. There are lots of suggestions out there on how to avoid this. Most of them are not good. You'll see people suggest spray the bottom of your snowshoes with Pam or some kind of oil spray. And I'm pretty sure that works great for about 5 minutes. And then it's going to be totally worn off by walking every step in the snow. So I don't put much stock in that. Typically when I'm going along, if I start feeling that that's happening and I feel those lumps under there, I'll kind of click my feet together, and sometimes that'll resolve it and you're good to go. Other times that'll buy you a couple of minutes and then it starts building up again. And when that happens, I find what you really have to do is just take your snowshoes off and dig the snow off. Even if there's a little bit left underneath, it makes it easier for more snow to build up on the bottom of your snowshoe. So take a minute, it's worth it. Dig that snow off, and then hopefully you'll have smooth sailing. The one weird thing that I haven't tried that I think might actually help, that I have heard others suggest, is you can duct tape the bottom of your snowshoe, and that just creates a really smooth surface. Might work, might help some, might not solve the problem. But again, most days, not an issue. Don't worry about it. It's mostly going to happen if you're in sunny areas on a warmer day, and especially if it's a less packed down trail. You don't want to walk too much with that much snow on the bottom of your snowshoe, because that can actually, if it's kind of this round ball, you can twist your ankle if you go down the wrong way. So one thing to think about. All right, so getting into safety. And again, the preemptive, I don't want to scare folks here, and some of this is more for comic humor than anything else, but some things to think about, just be aware of when it comes to safety when you're snowshoeing. This first one is really something you hear about if you're a downhill skier, not such an issue for snowshoeing, but you are out in areas where this could be an issue, especially if you start wandering off trail. Not really an issue if you're staying on a packed trail. So maybe you've heard of tree wells. You can see in this upper right photo here, as the snow falls down next to on trees, catches in the branches, and it doesn't accumulate down at the base of the tree. And so you get this kind of empty area here where there's no snow, but the snow is piling up over here. So here you can see in the photo, this is kind of an example of a pretty obvious tree well. And these can be pretty deep tree wells. I'll show you a quick little video here. Yeah, small tree. Yeah, but that's a pretty deep well, and it can be hard to get out of those. So watch out for those tree wells. The general rule of thumb with those is you don't want to, if you find yourself off balance and falling into one, don't go down head first. Try to grab onto branches or the trunk of the tree. And those can be deceptive. They can be not the big obvious ones like I showed the picture of at first. It can be just a small little tree poking, what looks like a small little tree poking up through the snow. There may be an empty slot underneath there that you don't want to fall into. And this is, again, for snowshoeing, not something, especially if you're not off trail, that you need to worry too much about. Oh, so on this photo here, one thing that oftentimes happens, again, this is, I've never heard of anyone getting hurt this way, but after a big snowfall, you're out there walking along, the sun's out, snow starts to fall down out of the branches of the trees. Human instinct is to look up to see where's that snow coming from. And you don't want to do that. You want to keep walking, wait until you get a little head further up, and then you can look back at the tree and marvel at the snow that's falling. You don't want to look up and catch an ice ball in the face. You can see in this photo here, some of these snow buildups on the branches can be really, really big. So don't want to be looking up when one of those falls. But again, I've never heard of anybody getting hurt by this, but it is a theoretical, funny type of potential safety issue. False trails, this is an interesting one. If you go out after a fresh snowfall and you're the first person to carve trail, you may have a plan to go, I'm going to go up to this peak over here. And for the first part of the way, I'm going to be on the regular trail, and then I'm going to make my own trail and go up to that peak. And the next person who comes along, they're going to see the track, and that's going to very compellingly look like that's where the trail goes, is right up to that peak. And so you're going to be tempted to follow that, even though the actual trail itself goes off in a different direction. So just remember to have a map with you and keep an eye out for those blue diamond markers on the trees, because it can be pretty deceptive if a group of people head off in one direction or another direction. In crowded areas, sometimes you'll see like, oh my gosh, every 10 feet, there's a different trail going a different way. Like, what am I supposed to do? A lot of times all those trails end up coming right back to the main trail. But again, having a nice map with you, keeping track of your trail markers will get you through that just fine. I always recommend people keep their snowshoes on. A lot of times when you're out snowshoeing, you'll be on a pretty hard packed snowshoe or snow conditions. And you'll be like, I can just walk in my snow boots. I'm fine. This will be a lot easier. I'll take my snowshoes off. The other thing you see out on the trail very often is hard packed snow, hard packed snow, hard packed snow, deep hole, where we call it a post hole, where somebody took their snowshoes off or was just hiking and their foot went down, 2 feet down. It can really change. It's hard pack and it looks hard pack, and then it's not. And sometimes it can just get icy all of a sudden if it's the right sun and then shade. So best to just keep your snowshoes on. You paid for them. If you take them off, you're gonna have to carry them. So best to keep them on for just a little bit safer and easier that way. As with hiking, tell someone where you're going and when you're going to be back. You can leave a note on your windshield, all that good stuff. So always be safe. Pavement and rocks. So sometimes you're out on a snowshoe trail, maybe in the early season or the late season, you get to a spot on the trail where there's no snow, it's bare ground. Do you have to take your snowshoes off, or can you just walk right across it? The answer is it depends. If it's just dirt and grass, walk right through it, no problem. If it's a bunch of lava rock and sharp, just general rock, take your snowshoes off. Your snowshoes have the teeth on the bottom, and that's where you get all your traction on the ice and the snow. So you don't want to walk on rock, because that's going to dull those teeth, and then you won't have as good a traction when you get to the icy spots. So take them off there. Similar situation if you're in a snow park or you're crossing a road or something. If it's snow covered and hard packed snow, great, you're all good. You can walk right across it with the snowshoes. But if it's bare pavement, take your snowshoes off for sure. Save the teeth. All right, so enough about safety and tips. Let's look at some pretty pictures and get some hot tips on places to go snowshoeing. All right, so here in Central Oregon, you're blessed to be close to the snow and have some really great options. So this is a simple map I put together here. You can see Broken Top, these are the Sisters, Mount Bachelor over here. This white line here goes from Bend, this is the Cascade Lakes Highway, gets you all the way out to the Mount Bachelor ski area. This white line here is the road that takes you down to Sun River over here. And then in blue font, you have these different snow park places or places you can go snowshoeing. And for each of these, there's usually, you're going to be able to find a PDF map that shows all the trails, and you can load it into that Avenza app on your phone. Great system. This is not comprehensive. There are a few other places I'm going to talk about also that are off this map, but just to give you a little bit of orientation, here's where a bunch of these places are. You've got Todd Lake up here, Tumalo Mountain, Edison Butte. And remember that rule on dogs is Cascade Lakes Highway is here to the north. So these ones, you're going to have no dogs. To the south, dogs are allowed. All right, Edison Butte. Going back to that very important tip, where do I want to go today depends on the weather. If it's a stormy day, Edison Butte is a great one to go to. This has amazing old growth ponderosa pine forests. It has these rocky fields underneath that you don't see in the winter because they're snow covered, but it just looks like these fields of marshmallows. It's really, really neat. I encourage folks to check this out. Good on a stormy day because it's pretty much all in the forest there. There are a few peekaboo views you can get of Mount Bachelor on this hike, but not really about the long distance mountain views, more about the up close old growth trees. And this one is usually not as crowded as some of the other routes. And another thing I'll point out is the trail designs are really well thought out at a lot of these snow parks. So you'll oftentimes see on the trail map that there's short snowshoe loop, long snowshoe loop. Not the most creative names, but it's pretty functional. It gets the point across. So you can kind of base it on how far you want to go. There are a couple different trails you can take here at Edison Butte. And then opposite end of this, if it's a sunny day, you'll find me maybe going up to the top of Tumalo Mountain. The views there are just bonkers on a clear day. It's not the easiest hike. It is short distance wise, but it's pretty much straight up. Not straight up, but it's up the entire way from Winoga Snow Park all the way to the summit. There's not really a trail. There is one that's buried under 10 or 15 feet of snow, but there's not, somebody went this way, somebody skied up that way, somebody snowshoed up this other way. You basically, the rule of thumb when you're going up Tumalo, keep going up. If you find yourself going down or flat, you're going the wrong way, go up and that'll get you to the top. Have a map, be careful, but that's the general rule of thumb. And then when you get up to the top, you can see the views and a little bit of my thumb up in the top left corner there, of course. The other tricky thing with Tumalo Mountain these days is it has a very small snow park. And so there's not a lot of parking there. So that can be an issue. If you want to get up here and your heart's set on it, you might need to go first thing in the morning, or maybe try later in the really late morning or afternoon after some people have kind of gone up and come down. So one thing to factor in there. Tumalo Falls, this is a great one, super spectacular view of Tumalo Falls from the end. Look out here. Basically what you're going to do here is there are a couple of options. You can hike or snowshoe right along the road that you would normally drive out to get to the Tumalo Falls area. In the winter, it's snow covered and gated, so you can't drive it. So it's all just people going out on the snow there. Parking can get a little rambunctious there, but there are a number of options and places you can park. And then, so one option is you can just go snowshoe right on the road. That's what most people do. There is a snowshoe trail that's on the other side of Tumalo Creek, so on the south side there. And so one option is you can go one way, you can go the other way, or you can kind of make it into a loop and go up one way and come back the other way. And they all end up starting from pretty much the same spot. This is another good one where you can do this on a stormy day because you're not relying on long distance views. It's a little bit lower elevation, so keep your eye out if the freezing level's gone up a little bit. This one could be rainy, but most days this one's going to be a winner. All right, off the beaten track, I'm betting few to no one in the audience tonight has been to Glazed Meadow. This is one of those really neat spots, kind of right near Black Butte Ranch and Black Butte itself. There's not any designated trail for snowshoeing here. There's not a snow park. There is a wide spot, T in the road, Indian Ford Road comes right off of the highway there. And there's a wide spot plowed. And so you can just park there, cross over the highway, and start snowshoeing out into this area here. Very flat. You can kind of wander around as far as you want. Because there's no trail, you want to make sure you have some GPS or some good other map other than a designated trail map for that area. Any map that'll kind of help keep you referenced on where you are in relation to where you parked. And it's a great spot where you can get out to the meadow and you see views of the mountains before you. There are old growth forests here that are just spectacular. This one's only good under certain conditions. We have to have a low snowpack. So this year being a good year for this, it's probably you could go out here pretty much since the snow started in mid-December. This area would have had snow on it. But if it's a year where there's not a lot of snow, Glazed Meadow will not be the place to go. So this is a little bit off the beaten track, hidden gem to check out. This is an area Oregon Wild has worked to protect over the years and helped with design some restoration projects and get those done with the Forest Service and other partners. All right, and then a little broader outside of the greater Central Oregon, getting out to Crater Lake to snowshoe is pretty unforgettable. Definitely don't want to go there on a stormy day. Crater Lake gets 44 feet of snow per year on average. And so on the left-hand side here, if you go on a cloudy day, notice the great views of the lake on the left here. The lake is back there, but you're not going to see it. You'll see some neat trees, but it's a bit of a long drive to see some neat trees around the rim of the lake there. Basically what you do there is you just go up, and you got to remember that in the wintertime, they don't plow the north entrance. So you got to go a little further down 97 and then find your way in from the south there. And then you can hike right up to the rim there. Be careful, don't get too close to the rim and the edge, but plenty of great views. If you get up here on a sunny day in the winter, my goodness, Crater Lake is spectacular in the summer, but check it out in the winter. It is, just a phenomenal perspective and view of the lake. So check that out. And you can kind of snowshoe right along. There's sort of no official trail. You kind of snowshoe along as far as you want along the ridge there. When you get there, you could go up Garfield Peak, but I think that's going to be pretty sketchy under most snowshoe conditions. So I wouldn't recommend that. If you've hiked that, there's some pretty steep drop-offs. So I wouldn't recommend that. I would stay in the safe areas, and you don't need to get better views. The views from the nice, easy, safe areas are more than enough. Also, here in Central Oregon, the Ochako Mountains, something Jamie in particular has worked a number of years to help protect. There are a couple of snow parks out off of Highway 26 as you head past Prineville into the Ochako Mountains. Couple good trails that you can check out there. These aren't always the first places plowed after a big snowstorm. So if there was a big snowstorm last night, you might give it a day before you head out. But you can go to Walton Lake. Some people go up to Lookout Mountain. Depends on how far you want to go. That's some good place to get away from the crowds. If it's a busy weekend in the Cascades off Century Drive or Cascade Lakes Highway, Ochakos are a great getaway to escape the masses. And then, also in the greater Central Oregon, I would also suggest checking out Santiam in Willamette Pass. This photo is, you can see Mount Washington there, and pretty spectacular. Anyone who's driven up there on the Santiam Pass has seen, there's that fire scar area. Great views because it's all open on a clear day. On a stormy day, you're pretty exposed, so maybe not the ideal day for that, but a couple different snow parks there to choose from. Ray Benson Snow Park is the really big one. That can get a little crowded if it's the weekend, so keep that in mind. But lots of good options there. And once you get out of the snow parks, this is true at Ray Benson, but also most of these places, you get to the snow park, you see a whole lot of cars, and you're like, oh man, everybody and their brothers here today. Have faith. Once you get on the trails, there's so many different trails at a lot of these snow parks that you quickly, everybody disperses out, and you'll still see people at most of these spots, but it's nowhere near as crowded as the snow park might have you think. And if you're at one of those snow parks that's shared with snowmobilers, remember, fortunately, the trail design is oftentimes snowshoers go this way out of the snow park and snowmobilers go that way out of the snow park. You tend to not want to linger in the snow parks that are shared with snowmobilers because frankly, they stink. Those snowmobiles, they tend to run them a lot in the snow park while they're getting ready or finished or whatever. And the exhaust from them is just terrible. I'm sure they're lots of fun, but they're also pretty obnoxious in the snow park. And they're noisy, but again, fortunately, most of the time the trail design is really good and you quickly are out of earshot of snowmobiles, which is great. Willamette Pass, also a lot fewer people there. So if you're looking to escape the crowds, you can head up that way. You still have some Eugene crowd coming over there, but Rosary Lakes is a good one. Pacific Crest Trail, little on the slightly longer side to get into the lakes, but another nice one to do. All right, and then my pro tip here on if you're looking for romance and snowshoeing, snowshoes plus a full moon equals serious romance. I may or may not have proposed to my wife, my now wife, on a snowshoe trip on a full moon. If you're out at night, all those safety precautions apply sort of in double. So be extra careful. It's going to be colder, but if you get out there in a nice open area, going up Tumalo or pretty much anywhere in the snow on a full moon, that snow just lights up and reflects the moon back. It's pretty awesome. So check it out. Be extra careful. And if you're looking to propose, it's a great way to do it. I think if you do it on a full moon snowshoe, the percentages of chances of getting a yes answer go through the roof on a full moon snowshoe. So winding down here, if folks are interested in getting involved with Oregon Wild, you can become a member. We'd love to have you join us. We're a nonprofit, as Jamie mentioned, and we can't do the things we do to help share the information about snowshoeing, but also about how best to protect the natural treasures in Oregon, the old growth forest, the carbon storage, the clean drinking water, the fish and wildlife. Without your support as members, we simply can't do the things we do. So we'd love to have you on the team there as a member. You can volunteer. Volunteering is a little trickier during COVID, but there are still some ways to get involved on that front. You can write letters to the editor if you have a business that wants to lend their name and support and endorse the River Democracy Act or other campaigns we're working on. That's great. You can get on our email list, which is a really helpful way to stay plugged in. I'm guessing most of you who are listening are probably on that. But when you do those clicks to send a message to the governor, to Wyden, to whoever, the Forest Service, it really does make a difference. So thank you for engaging on that front, and please continue to do so. All right, so I'm going to wind down there and screen share and see if Jamie has any questions that have popped up.
Yeah, we have a bunch. So we'll take a couple extra minutes here. I know we're a few minutes over time, but we'll get to a handful of these questions before we wrap up here. Do you check the avalanche risk before you go? Where should you or where do you not need to worry about it?
Oh, Jamie, I'm just going to let you handle that one.
Okay. I think some of these snow parks, I definitely would not worry about it. If you're at Virginia Meisner Snow Park, if you're at Winoga, if you're at Edison, not necessarily an issue. But if you feel like you're kind of going out away from a developed area at all, it can't hurt at all. We have a really awesome nonprofit avalanche center in Bend, and they post a forecast for most weekend days. You can just look up Central Oregon avalanche center. And that'll just help give you an idea of the conditions and safety for that day. So if you feel like you're going out truly into the backcountry, take an extra 2 seconds to look it up. But otherwise, you're probably good if you're at a developed area. Can you use your summer trekking poles for snowshoeing trips?
Yes, good question. And I should have mentioned this. So you can totally use your summer trekking poles. A lot of times what happens when you're out snowshoeing is, there's all this snow and then the snowshoe trail gets packed down. And so it kind of becomes this little carved out ravine trough that you're hiking through where the snow next to you is built up a little bit. So the key being, if you have extendable poles that you can adjust the length on, can be very helpful, because if you have your long regular length poles and the snow is built up on the side of the trail, you're going to be pulling up like this and it's not going to be very useful. So helpful to have the adjustable kind. But yeah, you can use whatever poles you want.
And if you can put baskets on them, bigger baskets.
Yes.
Is another, yeah, Brian pointed that out in the chat. This is more of a situational question. Someone asked about if you have to kind of cross any sort of like creek or gully drainage that is there, but it seems to be full of snow and it seems to be flat. Is that safe?
Yeah, I've done some things in that realm that I would not recommend. So do as I say, not as I do. But yeah, you want to be really pretty careful on that front. That is a really good question. A lot of times when you're out, say you're going out near Todd Lake, this is one spot where I know I've seen it, or White River up on Mount Hood, you'll see, oh, hey, look, there's a little gap in the snow and there's a creek down there. And then the creek kind of disappears and goes under the snow. There may be 10 feet of snow on top of that creek and is totally safe, or there may not be, or maybe there's 10 feet and then there's, you can't tell, but it gets to be very shallow somewhere else. So keep an eye out where the lowest point on the landscape is, because that could be a pretty thin layer of snow that's blown over and frozen, and may not be safe to walk on. Again, most of the time, 99% of the time, if you're on a snowshoe trail, non-issue. Don't worry about it. This is more for when you're off trail, exploring and getting after it that way. One thing I do sort of allow myself to risk it a little bit more is if I see some other people have snowshoed across what looks like a snow bridge, then I'll be like, okay, I'll follow them over the cliff. So be careful, because maybe snow conditions change since they did that, but you could do that. If you are going to flex, it's helpful to see that. But again, kind of keep an eye out where the lowest point on the landscape is. And that's a good hint at, okay, I don't want to be messing around down there, because it can be pretty dangerous. When in doubt, err on the side of caution, especially if you don't know the area. So yeah, good question.
This one, I'm really glad someone asked. I think I've seen these presentations from Eric maybe 3 years in a row, and I've never seen a single person ask this question. Any tips about bathroom breaks? I'm a little nervous about trying to squat with snowshoes on, and a little embarrassed about trying to find a private place since it's harder to go off the trail. Also, if necessary, still dig down to the snow and into the dirt, right? Thanks.
Yeah, good question. It's funny that I'm surprised that question doesn't come up more often. A lot of times out snowshoeing, it's cold. So the rule of thumb that a lot of people use is just hold it. But that on the longer track certainly does not work. A lot of our snow parks do have porta potties. So that is, a good reminder, hit the porta potty before you go, or not a porta potty, but like a permanent outhouse. So make use of that before you go, and then know that it's there when you get back. But things happen, and maybe you got to go when you're out on the trail. Definitely don't go right next to the trail. You want to find a safe spot, but do try to make your way off the trail. The usual rule of thumb, also don't go right next to any water sources. So if there's a creek, creeks are also a little bit more dangerous to get too close to when you're out in the snow. But being away from water sources, and so yeah, so that's probably my general rules of thumb. Jamie, on the female side of the equation, any other tips you want to add into the mix there?
If you're the type of person that needs to squat to pee, having trekking poles is super helpful for that, especially if you kind of struggle with that movement a little bit, because you can really use the poles for additional support while you're squatting. Usually there's more than enough trees and rocks and terrain features for you to get away from kind of prying eyes. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. And Mary recommended you can always hang onto a tree. That's another tried and true method. And if you're the type of person that just generally has trouble with squatting motion, or if you're, for example, my good friend is pregnant right now and squatting for her is kind of an issue, they do actually sell a device called a Shiwi, is one of the brands that you can buy at places like REI and other places. That sounds gross, but it's actually super helpful. So you can look into that as well.
I'm seeing some suggestions on holding onto a tree or leaning against a tree. Just remember to be a little cautious about those tree wells. So if you can see that it's, maybe test it, pack it down as you get closer to those trees.
Yeah. Oh, and to address, I guess, the second part of that question, the wilderness teacher and me has to address this. If you do need to go number 2, the best thing to do is to just pack it out. So you can buy a product called a wag bag or something similar at REI or other stores. It's really helpful just to have like 1 or 2 of those in your backpack or your car. How do you figure out how long your snowshoes should be?
How long your snowshoes should be. So if kind of what I was mentioning earlier, if you are doing really long distance routes or you're carrying a heavy pack, you want to make sure you have exactly the right length. They do make some different lengths, and so you can certainly find different sizes. I really wouldn't sweat that too much. Obviously, if you're a short person, don't get the longest ones you can find. Yeah, I'm not sure there's an actual height to length of snowshoe conversion table that you can find. But if you go anywhere that where they're selling snowshoes, I'm sure they can give you some guidance on that. If you find a pair of snowshoes that's on sale and it's anywhere in the mid range, I would call that good. Again, unless you're planning on doing mostly hardcore long distance routes, those short, even if you are heavier or taller or any one of those ends of the spectrum, if you're going out on regular day hike trips, any snowshoe is going to work just fine for you.
Nice. Okay, I'm gonna ask 2 more. Do you have any recommendations for hikes out of Three Creeks Snow Park outside of Sisters?
Yeah, I have not. I have that on my short list to spend a bit more time up at Three Creeks. So Jamie, I don't know if you do, but there are a couple of options up there. You do have more, kind of have that snowmobile dynamic, and I know that is also, they had some issues plowing up there this past week with the big snow. I don't think that's usually an issue, but you can always good to check the Forest Service Facebook page or their website. Are good places to get tips there. But I don't have a specific trail there in mind. Jamie, do you have anyone you would recommend there?
I've only been up 1 time for a full moon snowshoe, actually, and it was really fun, to the Jeff View Shelter. And there is a map to it on Central Oregon Nordic Club's website. I just dropped that link in the chat here, and we'll have it in the email that goes out after this. But there are lots of options, and there is a certain amount of time where you have to overlap with the snowmobile trail, which is the road during the summer. But if you're going at night, there usually aren't that many snowmobilers out, so I didn't experience that. Okay, and then final question. This was one of the first questions that came in early in the presentation. We learned that only 4% of Oregon is designated as wilderness. Is Oregon's low percentage of wilderness due to good protections through other means, or are we just at a low percent because the land base is heavily used by industry?
Yeah, good question. And credit points for digging into the why of that statistic. So the answer is we could spend an hour talking about digging into the answer on that. The short version is we have long had a very politically influential timber industry in Oregon. Less so today, far less so today than in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Started changing in the 90s. But while a lot of other states passed big wilderness bills in 1964, we protected some as much as our predecessors could manage. And again, in 1984, there was another big wilderness bill nationally, and Oregon protected some, but we had this Senator Hatfield, who was basically king. Whatever he said goes. He was in the Senate for so long. He was on all the right committees. So he could basically do whatever he wanted. He was interestingly progressive on certain issues. When it came to logging and how much lands would be protected in Oregon, he was not a very friendly conservationist. So he did some wilderness. If you look at the calendar of when he did wilderness, you'll notice a particular pattern. It was once every 6 years. What happens in the Senate once every 6 years? Yes, you guessed it. Senators are up for re-election. So he would do a little wilderness once every 6 years. And that's great. He protected some really important places that we enjoy today, but other states were doing a better job and had better balance. So it was really that timber industry influence where they were clear cutting. I think in the 1980s, an analysis was done that showed they were clear cutting 2 to 3 square miles of old growth every single week, which is just hard to fathom how that could happen. So all the more important that we protect those last few places that we have left in Oregon. So if you want to play with the numbers and take them one step further, we've protected about 4% of the state as wilderness being the gold standard for public lands protection. Wild and scenic river designation is pretty good, not quite as good as wilderness, but pretty good. So we're going to sort of help with some other protections. But other than that, there is no other good protection where we've done really well to make up for that. In fact, on state and private lands, we're actually also behind all neighboring states as well. We're starting to catch up there. But yeah, unfortunate legacy of influence from the timber industry having their way politically, but that's what we're all here for. We try to turn the tables there and make sure we protect the last of the best of what's left and restore those areas that have been clear cut 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago so that we can grow old growth and better habitat in the future.
Well said. Awesome. Well, we are 17 minutes past 7, so I'm going to go ahead and close this out for the evening. Thank you, Eric, so much for sharing your depth of knowledge with us. We had a ton of engagement. Thanks to everyone who came and asked so many questions. We're going to record this, obviously, and it'll be sent out to you tomorrow in your email. And there'll also be a link on our website, so if you want to share it with family and friends or revisit it for just tips next time you're getting ready to go out, that it'll be there ready and waiting for you. And don't forget to join us next week for our webcast on Fisher and Martins. Thanks so much, Eric, and have a wonderful night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Good night.